So without any further ado, I'd like to begin to have that conversation, and I'd like to start off with Alana. 1 in 5 U.S. adults experience mental illness. 1 in 20 adults experience serious mental illness. 17% of youth ages 9 to 17 experience a mental disorder. What are some warning signs of mental illness?
Okay, good. You guys can hear me? Okay. Thank you for the question, Keith. So what I hear with this question is essentially, how do we recognize mental illness in others? Because clearly it's pervasive. Those numbers indicate that it's quite a few people who are experiencing it. And so how do we recognize it? The first thing that comes to mind in recognizing is tapping in with yourself and kind of asking yourself, am I feeling off? We first have to assess ourselves. And once you kind of check in with yourself and say, am I feeling okay? Am I feeling normal? That can be a cue if you're like, some things are a little off. Each mental illness can have a different set of symptoms. So that's why checking in with yourself to assess what symptoms are feeling off within you is important. Other general symptoms, though, typically are along the lines of not really finding interest in things that you once enjoyed, maybe feeling more fatigued or more stressed than usual. Some people may feel on edge, kind of like they're quick to anger or quick to sadness or quick to any sort of emotion that isn't typical for them. Those are just a couple, but pretty broad symptoms and signs.
Okay. Trey, on a follow-up, what are some of the types of mental illness?
Thank you for that question. Good evening, good afternoon, church. So repeat that question.
What are some of the types of mental illness?
Okay, so when we think about mental illness, we often think about something that doesn't seem right. So when we as psychologists look at that, there are several broad areas of mental illness. We have the depressive disorders, and within a depressive disorder, we have major depression, we have dysthymia, we have all of those disorders that lowers the mood. So that's an entire category. Within that category also, we have the bipolar disorders, and when you think about bipolar disorder, you think about a vacillation of how a person feels. So they can be overly excited on one instance, and then they can be extremely low on the other. That's a category within itself. The next category are the anxiety disorders. And when we think about anxiety disorder, think about generalized anxiety disorder when people just have a general fear. And also within that category, you may see panic attacks. So people, and I've seen people in my practice who they come in and they say, hey, I was able to drive perfectly fine, but after that accident, now I'm scared. So that can be up under that anxiety umbrella. Also up under that, we have something that we see in our community called PTSD, which is trauma.
Sure.
Trauma is one of those up under that anxiety disorder. And in Chicago, we had a psychiatrist years ago. His name was Carl Bell. He did a lot of research on inner city trauma, and he would always say, because I used to work for him for a little bit, he would always say, how can we call it post-traumatic stress when we're still dealing with it? So that's up under that anxiety disorder umbrella. The next one we have are the psychotic disorders. Okay. And we see these typically in patients who are, it's sort of like they're trapped within themselves. So we see disorders like schizophrenia, when they're actively hearing voices or hallucinating, still up under that category. We have schizoid disorder, so where people can be odd in their mannerism and behavior. So we see in mental health, we tackle, and I just gave you guys just a few of those categories, but of course we have eating disorders, we have adjustment problems where people have, challenges with everyday living. So I want you to think of it like this. If it's something like the good doctor said, if it's something that's abnormal, then things are not wrong with you. You just need to go and get whatever is going on identified. And we have, the disorders, and then, of course, we have the solutions to the problems as well.
Okay. Now, I want, before I move on, I want Alana, if you would, this question is to you. Because I want to piggyback on that space for a minute before we kind of move on. What are some of the root causes of mental illness?
Okay, so that's kind of a loaded question because it's a lot of causes. And really, I won't even say causes as much as I'll say instigators. Mm-hmm. So I'll separate it from biological to environmental. So biological, just like some of us might be predisposed to diabetes or high blood pressure or something, we may also be predisposed to some mental health disorders. Some disorders carry a larger biological component. So for instance, like schizophrenia or bipolar, it's more likely that if a parent or someone in your family has those disorders, you are more vulnerable to it. What I see a lot are disorders that are instigated by the environment or community. So this can be very commonly, I work with clients who are deeply unhappy with work or deeply unhappy with some sort of life situation that really sends them into a depression, or that really sends them to feeling anxiety, or that really sends them to drinking or using substances, etc. So I tend to focus a lot on the environmental or the community aspects that kind of instigate mental illness.
Thank you. A family has a loved one. You can sit. Yeah. Family has a loved one. They are having a manic episode. It comes out of the blue, and they're seeking help, trying to figure out, how do I address it? Mary Ann, I'd like to come to you with this question. For families that are experiencing mental illness in their household, what is NAMI, and what does NAMI do?
Is this on?
Yeah, it's on.
Is it on? Can you hear me? Okay. Say that again. I'm sorry.
What is NAMI, and what does NAMI do? What services do they provide?
Okay. NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and what it is, it's a program or an affiliation of families that have learned how to help their loved ones. And so we have signature programs such as Family to Family, Family and Friends Basics, just to mention a few, that help families learn what their next steps are to help that person that lives with the illness.
And for NAMI South Chicago,
South suburbs.
suburb of Chicago, what areas do you cover?
We cover anywhere from 95th Street to Orland to Crete to Indiana, and that's all the south suburban areas. We even get people from 55th Street, and some people come from New Lenox because they don't want to travel to Joliet.
Very good, very good. Now I'm going to go over here to the other side, and I'd like to, because I want to stay in that same theme. Families having a manic episode, they call 911. What should the family do? And I'd like to pose this to Troy.
Well, thank you for that question. First of all, I would advocate that if somebody is in a manic episode, we should consider if 911 is the number that we want to call, because there are other services available that may be more appropriate. Many of you may not have heard of 988, which is a rebrand of the former National Suicide Prevention line. It is now the National Suicide Prevention and Crisis Lifeline. And it is available 24/7 throughout the country. By dialing those three numbers, no matter where you are, you will get trained individuals who will answer the call, help you through the crisis, and be able to provide you with resources in the area in which you live. So that may be something that's more beneficial for you. If, however, a family was to call 911, I would first ask that one of the first things that you do when you get that 911 operator is you let them know that you are calling regarding a mental health crisis. That needs to be made very clear. Second thing is to request a crisis intervention team officer or a CIT officer. You can also ask the dispatcher if that agency has a co-response program where they may have clinicians or mental health professionals that also respond along with law enforcement, because that will give you a better response, people with more training than the average patrol officer, and that's what we want for successful outcomes. So you've identified that you have a mental health crisis, you've asked for a CIT officer or a mental health co-response. I would then start providing as much information as you can. What is the name of the individual you're calling in regards to? What is the behavior that you are observing that is leading to the call? Are they diagnosed with any mental illnesses? Are they taking any medication? Are they currently taking that medication, or have they stopped taking it? Are they under the influence of any substances right now? These are pieces of information that will help guide officers who respond. Because I want you to imagine imagine right now for yourself, if you were the officer that was responding and all you heard was somebody in the midst of crisis, and I know it's hard, right? When you have a crisis going on and things are elevated and emotions are high, we just want to say, get somebody here now. But if the only thing we say is, I need the police here now, and things are terrible, and the officer shows up on scene and he hears yelling, he or she is unaware of what's going on. So we really want to set the officers up and your loved one and the family for success by letting them know it's a mental health crisis, ask for a CIT or co-response, let them know all that information that I talked to you about. And then the last thing I will tell you is this: when officers arrive, I know that you want to spend a lot of time at the front door giving them as much information as you can. But again, try to flip the perspective. They don't know what's going on in the house. So try to give them as much information as quickly as you can and say, I understand you need to get in the house. I will be here. I would love to give you all the rest of the information. You can go ahead and make sure things are secure. And then they'll go in, they'll make sure it's secure, and they'll come back out and talk. So those are some of the things that we can do. We call 911.
So from the perspective of de-escalation, because sometimes, again, law enforcement shows up, the tradition in the past has been that's an escalated event. But from the perspective of de-escalation, what is a crisis intervention team, and you spoke a little bit about it, and why is that important? Not only as being trained officers with that training, but also for now with the CESA law and the partnership with community-based organizations and crisis intervention teams that are sent as a part of 988.
So you are off to an amazing start for a crisis intervention team. I teach law enforcement officers throughout the state in how to better respond to mental health crisis situations. I give public presentations, and so often I will ask individuals, how many of you know that a crisis intervention team is a community program, not a law enforcement program? How many know that? Very few, and that is typical. Training officers to better respond to a mental health crisis is definitely part of a crisis intervention team. We want officers who are trained to respond better when they have to respond. But what we really need is a community, which you all are doing here, to try and get people connected to treatment before they go into crisis. Have trained responders who go there that can help successfully navigate better outcomes. And then after that crisis, the community comes together and tries to ensure that that individual is getting the help that they need so they don't go into crisis again. And so who's part of that crisis intervention team? That would be law enforcement, fire departments. That would be your hospitals, your state's attorney's office, public defenders, Illinois Guardianship and Advocacy Commission, faith-based institutions, which is a great place because how many people are not willing to see a professional, but they will see their faith leader, right? So all the people in the advocacy organizations like NAMI, all of us working together to try to connect people to the treatment they need and keep them from going into crisis. That is a crisis intervention team. And the officers, to answer the other part of your question, a crisis intervention team officer, CIT officer, is a patrol officer who has had extra training in how to respond to a mental health or behavioral health crisis. It's a 40-hour class. They get exposed to signs and symptoms of the different mental illnesses. They interact with people who are living with mental illness. They learn what some of the laws are regarding what we can and cannot do to connect people to treatment. And they actually go through scenario-based training. So they have an opportunity to try out what they've learned. So these officers are going to do a little bit better than officers who have had no training at all.
Very good. Thank you very much, Troy. To our faith base, Pastor Singleton, how do you see the role of the church in spirituality and the issues of mental health impacting within our community?
Well, thanks so much for the question. The church is another stakeholder in this whole team. As I am, I'm now in my 28th year of senior pastor Victory, and I am dealing in my office with more and more mental health related issues in people's families. And they come to me trying to get advice on how to handle it. And one of the questions I hope get answered by some of our panelists will be, and this is just real stuff happening now, where let's say the spouse is mentally ill and fighting their spouse hard about it, and that there's nothing wrong with them and they can't get anything done. That really needs, would y'all agree with me, that really needs to be addressed. I deal with a lot of the caregivers who are struggling on what to do, and I watch them wear out from constantly the stress that comes from their loved one. And he's right, we are a part of the team because the pastors, preachers, counselors are the people trust. Because this is, so some of this is very, and some people, to them, is very humiliating and very hurtful. And sometimes they try to keep things secret when they really need to get some help, because by trying to keep it secret, they're wearing themselves as caregivers out. I see that often. So I don't know if you want me to give why I care so much right now. I just want to directly answer your question.
Pastor, you have the floor.
Okay.
Absolutely.
The reason this is so important to me, I am the oldest of 7 kids, and there was a 19-year age difference between me and my younger twin brothers. I have to tell people, I'm not a twin. One of me is enough. But I had identical twin brothers that by the time they were 17 years old, they were showing signs of mental illness. No nice way to say this. At 11, I found out, because my dad was an alcoholic who loved his family, functional, worked hard, but set very bad examples for me and my brothers. But these younger brothers, they were drinking at 11. At 11, they were going behind my dad's bar and drink, I mean hard alcohol. And by the time they were 15, 16, they were on drugs. And of course, that's another great question, is, it may not be a solid answer, but around that relationship between their being bipolar, and was it exacerbated by how young they started, doing drugs and alcohol? I think that is a question people would have out here. So that created tremendous trauma in my family. I have gotten calls from my mom 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I live in the suburbs. I had to drive all the way in the city because, like he said, on the bipolar, they're super high one moment and down the next, and they're threatening suicide, and it's just very, very difficult. The other thing is that he mentioned who mentioned Dr. Bell? You mentioned Dr. Bell. I was chief finance officer for the organization that Dr. Bell was the CEO. So I saw mental illness every day for a living. And I didn't treat them. Occasionally their problems were very spiritual though. When I'm on my jobs, I never allowed them to call me Reverend or Minister Singleton. I just never allowed that. And I wasn't even a pastor then. But the reason I did that is I'm a very professional person. And sometimes Christians take advantage of being a Christian and don't want to work. So in some of my jobs, they said, he's not Minister Singleton, he's Sinister Singleton. Because if you didn't do your job, you would get fired. But there were times that the issues people had were deeply connected to spirituality. And after work, I would stay and counsel in those situations. And I worked very closely with Dr. Bell, who passed about 2 or 3 years ago.
Sometimes families that are struggling with mental illness and a loved one, they have to take stronger measures in order to gain a little bit more control over how to assist a loved one. And I'd like to direct this next question to Judge Furman. What are civil mental health proceedings, and why is understanding this important?
Yeah, good morning, Victory. So I am one of the judges who deal with, or one of the emergency mental health judges for the southwest suburbs. I'm at the Bridger Courthouse. I have about 45 cities, but I also deal with anyone from out here that comes over from Markham over to me. What happens is when somebody, it could be bipolar, schizophrenia, dementia, it could just be an anxiety attack, it could be autism episode. And let me piggyback on that in regards to that episode of what Troy indicated, and that is what truly happens over in the house. You have somebody, and everybody's seen this on television, because it ends up with somebody being shot or something else, and that is that person has a knife, that person has put holes in the wall, that person has harmed somebody over in the house. That person is going through a mental health episode. You don't want that person arrested. You want the police to come and either stop or you want them to help. And you're calling the police because, let's be honest, when somebody's putting a hole in the wall, the last thing you're sitting there thinking that you just want help. You're calling them, or that person's holding that knife. And you're calling over to the police, and they're coming in, and they hear over through dispatch, that person has that knife, that person has that gun, that person just put holes in the wall, that person just hurt you or somebody else. They're coming in to protect you. And what happens is something that none of us wanted to happen. And so that's where 988 comes in. And I piggyback, and I want to stress it for what Troy indicated, and that is the first thing, because you may not be sitting there and have a rundown of list of everything. You are going through it just as they are, and that anxiety, because your home, your body, your partner, you, the family, is in distress. The only thing that should be coming to your house is we're having a mental health issue, mental health. You should repeat that 3 to 4 times, because that way when they come, they know what it is, versus them coming in to protect you because that person has a knife and they're sitting over there trying to protect you as well as them, and that person's coming forward with a knife, but really they're just going through an episode. They may not be dangerous, or they may need to be calmed down. They may need that crisis intervention team, but if you do not say mental health or say their diagnosis, the first 3 words coming out of your mouth when you call them, then you have a different response from the police. So I caution everybody, not just you, but reach out to 3 people, anybody you know who's going through this type of episode, and let them know. If any type of episode, anything where they're calling in response, hopefully 988 first, but let's be honest, most people don't know about 988, so there's a push to try to get that out. So when they call 911, first 3 words, either that diagnosis over and over again or mental health again. Well, what happens is, what do you do from there? That person is going through an episode. They can't go back into the house. It could be, I deal with emergency mental health writs, where if a loved one, a family member, or somebody who is a caregiver has somebody in the house who is going through some type of mental health illness, then they can come and petition the court, ask for an order where I sign an order for that person to be taken involuntarily to the hospital. It could be a situation where that person's just not taking their medication. It could be an anxiety attack. It could be a number of different issues, mental health issues. From my order that I sign, the police have 72 hours to execute it. It is an order over to the police to execute, and a number of different ranges where you can take them to the hospital that they've been treating at, or a hospital that is the closest one there. And from that, the hospital there has 24 hours to decide whether or not they're going to make an involuntary commitment or release with medication. But what happens immediately is that situation where I've had mental health, and a lot of people don't like to recognize, and I appreciate the entertainers, the athletes, the actors, the prominent figures now coming out more and more, and people understand that it affects everybody. I've had people from doctors to lawyers to dentists to from police officers to educators. It affects everyone. And the best response I get is when I have people come back before me or they see me on the street, because it wasn't just a situation where they were going through an anxiety attack or they weren't taking their medication. They went into the hospital for 24 hours, they've been released, and now they're back. I've seen some of the best doctors, lawyers, and dentists that we have throughout the state. And they are at the best when they're functioning. You have, and I just piggyback from what Pastor Singleton just indicated for mental health and drugs. Sometimes those drugs is a cope or that alcohol for that mental health illness. And I have seen folks at I won't say the restaurant, one of the best chefs I've seen at one of the top restaurants out through the southwest suburbs, or south suburbs, has mental health issues, and he does drugs to sit there or to cope with his illness. He's at the top of his game, the top of his league, and as long as he is functioning well, everything is fine. But that is how you sit there when you pull in the mental health or pull in the drugs as alcohol to cope with that. But from my standpoint of what I do for writs, orders, if somebody is going through an episode, you are a loved one, you are a family member, you are a caregiver, you have knowledge of their diagnosis or what's going on, you can go to any suburban courthouse or the Daly Center, any suburban courthouse in Cook County, or any major courthouse in any Collier County, and ask them you can go to the state's attorney's office or just go straight to the clerk's office and tell them you want to see a judge for a mental health order. And thereafter, we will swear you in, question you on what's going on and whether or not that needs to be done right away.
Troy.
Thank you, Judge. Just two quick announcements. Number one, when the judge mentioned it was mentioned several times here also about 988. In your bag that you have, you should have a magnet in English or either in Spanish for 988. And then the second thing is that I know many of you probably have questions that you'd like to have answered. So in your bag, you also have, I think it's a 5x8 index card, and you should have a pencil or pen that's in there too. Can you please start writing down the questions that you may have, and right when it's time for the questions and answers, we'll have volunteers to come through the aisle and collect your index cards. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Troy, you had a follow-up.
Yes, I would love to just piggyback off of what Judge Fairman said here. The orders of detention examination that he's referring to, an amazing tool. In my time in Orland Park, I referred many families to them. We had a lot of success. Here's what I'm going to recommend from the standpoint how you get there and what happens after you get the order. When I referred people after they got that order, as you heard Judge Fairman say, it's good for 72 hours. So I like to tell families, do not pass go, do not collect $200, go straight from the courthouse, right to the police department, and ask to meet with the CIT supervisor, right? So now you have an opportunity to show that CIT supervisor, say, I have this order from the judge, how can we work together to best have this affected? Because what we don't want to have happen, what I have seen happen, and it's just out of not knowing how the system works, people get the order and then they wait 24, 30 hours until another crisis arises, and then they call up and they show the law enforcement officers on scene, here I have this order, and it gets difficult and it gets challenging, especially if they're being transported outside the jurisdiction. So my recommendation is absolutely 100% go in front of the judge, because now you're not relying on a law enforcement officer to make the decision, does this person qualify? You have your opportunity to be in court under oath, testify in front of a judge, and get your whole story out. You get the order, come back, meet with law enforcement and say, how can we best effectuate this? So in other words, what's the best time of day? When are they more receptive to this? I will walk him out to you rather than you coming in the house, right? You are working as a team. Again, this whole crisis intervention team, it's collaboration. And it also includes individuals and family members along with law enforcement and the community.
Very good. Very, very good. All right, we're gonna begin and work our way back this way, but I want to stay here just for a second. There are a lot of stigmas that are associated with mental health. people say, they used to say, well, Uncle Joe, he's crazy. Just leave him alone. He's back in the back room. Don't worry about him. He'll be okay. Or the stigma that it's not an episode, it's your life, that you can never get over it. So you're labeled by it. And so when people look at you, they look at you and say that's a weakness, or something's broken about that person, something that can't be fixed. Stigma is caused by misunderstanding. Pastor, what is your perspective as to why the stigma associated with mental illness is so deeply rooted within our African American community?
That is true. It is deeply, deeply rooted. So when I was the CFO Community Mental Health Council from 90 to 95, the patients requested that the bus that was used to transform them from day and from their facilities, it said Community Mental Health Council on the bus. So they said at every traffic light, everyone's looking up in the bus at them. That's a true story. They wanted us to take that off because, again, it's a sense of stigma. And on a more serious note, and this is for us as leaders, I think leaders need to be more vulnerable. Leaders need to be more vulnerable to show what we go through. So very quickly, Keith, you've never even heard this story. So when this church was being built, I began hallucinating. And even most of the members don't know it. I was under stress that I had never known. A lot of guys are jealous of all this. They don't know. I nearly lost my mind getting this thing built. I was preaching 3 sermons on Sunday at the other church. I was doing still 80% of all the counseling. I was meeting with the team to put all of this church together 2-3 times a week. Every I think it was Thursday or Friday. What did I say? Thursday or Friday. So I would tell the church, I'd say, most people go to hell one time and they through with it. I say, I go to hell every Friday. I go into that meeting with them contractors. I'm in hell all over again because I need another $50,000. I need another $100,000. This is going wrong. That's going wrong. And without giving the details, I began to see things that weren't there. I went and got help.
All right.
And this is what I think people miss, that the stress of this world, they can take you out of here. Yeah. And because mental illness runs in my family, I won't name names. I know we're not telecasting this, so I can be a little more liberal. But like some of you, I got family members, they're just undiagnosed. They got issues.
All right. All right. All right.
Ain't nothing wrong with me. Nothing's wrong with me. And they're very difficult to deal with because they won't own anything. But everyone sees it but them. Yeah. And so for me, I think the leaders play a big role in understanding as human beings, we are all fallen. Yes. And just hear me carefully, and then, because this is a serious question. Yes. You don't feel stigmatized when you get when a person gets cancer.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
And that was beyond their control.
That's right.
Why do we not understand that some of these mental health things that occur, they're beyond people's control? Yes. And if you don't, hear me, if you start knowing that you got some type of problem and you don't deal with it, it can get very exacerbated in some very embarrassing situations because you had too much pride. Since we in church, yes. I will quote a scripture. Pride cometh before a fall, and a haughty look before destruction. Your pride can bring you down because everyone else knows you got a problem but you. And you think you're hiding it. You're not hiding it. Get help and show that you know God can help you if you at least will own what you have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That needs to be said. That needs to be said. So I'm going to come back over on this way because there's a couple of things that Pastor said. One of them was about diagnosis, but then something came up earlier. I have a loved one that we've been suffering with mental illness for quite some time. And they continue to say, nothing's wrong with me. I'm okay. Nothing's wrong with me. It's everybody else. Nothing's wrong with me. I'm going to have this question with Trey, and then I have a follow-up with Alana. Okay. How do you address an issue like that?
Okay, so along the lines of a stigma, who wants to be told that something is wrong with them, first of all?
Right.
And then secondly, when they're told something, they oftentimes think it's a death sentence. How could I ever get out of this swirl of what's going on? What have I done to do this? So the stigma runs deep within our community. And as an African-American psychologist who has been serving this community since 2009, it's always interesting that on a daily basis, I get first-time patients. And I'm talking about patients who are in their 70s, first-time therapy patients. So, it's just my mission as a, African-American psychologist to put the word out that we have treatment for certain disorders, and it's a safe space for everyone. Right. So when we have that family member who, depending on what is going on with that family member, it can be the mental illness that they're experiencing that they're denying. So in other words, I'll just take, some disorders. Let's say psychotic disorder. So we know as clinicians that there's a cycle that goes with that. So the person may have to go see the judge, get involuntarily hospitalized, get medicated, get the orders for when they get out to go see me as a psychologist, and they equip them with everything. But as soon as they come out, because of the nature of the disorder, they start to doubt themselves. Was I really hearing voices? Was that really going on with me? I don't need this medication. So then they get off, and then now we got another cycle. Right. We see the same thing when people are addicted to drugs. Sure. They go to treatment, they go through the program, they're feeling good, and then every time I have patients, and I get a lot of patients who just got out of, detox, and they come to me, and the first thing I say to them, hey, how's those 12 steps coming along? Or how is that, how's that self-help group? They come to me and say, I thought you were going to help fix me. I said, well, we have what we call best practice. Sure. And you're dropping the ball along the way if you don't couple two things together. If it's alcohol or some type of substance, we want to couple self-help groups with the psychologist. If it's something like a serious mental illness, we want to couple that visit with the psychiatrist, medication, and psychology. So if we only see half of it, then we're, doing half the work really. Right. And I tell my patients, you have my number, but you better not call me at night. I'm not answering, because we have a structure in place that's going to assist you. Right. So when you have a family member who seems to deny the mental illness, don't blame them. It could be the mental illness. And what can help them, and I've seen, people will bring their loved one into me, and then I'll actually have them sit down for, the clinical interview for maybe about 10, 15 minutes so they can see, what an awesome psychologist I am. And then also, the intervention that we're going to utilize, and we also work that parent or that loved one into the treatment. So we can do certain things that'll make that person feel comfortable to be able to follow that course of treatment.
Very good, very good, very good. Alana, would you like to, on that same question, is there some feelings that you want to add to that? Or
Okay, regarding the...
Someone who continuously denies treatment, denies that they're ill.
Okay, so two thoughts. One, addressing the stigma and really how we got here. It was really because of psychologists and mental health clinicians that made it seem like it wasn't something that affected Black people. So when mental illness when people started to recognize that it was a thing, we saw a lot of the marketing was amongst the Caucasian community. And so Black folks distanced ourselves from that because we're like, well, that's not representative of us. And they taking these pills and doing all of this, you're going to the lady, that's on them. Well, over time, we realized that mental illness extends beyond race. Mm-hmm. And so we are now at a point where we recognize that it affects anyone regardless of your race or ethnicity or whatever. And to Pastor Singleton's point, a really helpful part of reducing the stigma is by being vulnerable. And I would add that another element to vulnerability is leaning in with curiosity. And so instead of telling someone like something's wrong with you, you need to go, that can feel invalidating to some folks, and that can feel really like you're isolating them. Lean in and ask, are you okay? What's happening? I remember when I felt blah, blah, blah. Are you experiencing that too? Really lean in with curiosity and ask them kind of what's going on with them.
Very good, very good,
Yeah.
very good, very good. So there's a link there between leaning in and curiosity to an organization like NAMI and what they do in terms of support for families that are dealing with loved ones. But I'd like to ask Mary Ann, the whole aspect of empathy. Empathy is one of those leaning in type of things by which you're trying to understand what your loved one is going through. Could you speak a little bit about empathy in this space of mental health and wellness?
Okay. With that said, I'm going to read you a letter, okay? And it is about empathy, okay? This is the first step to recovery. My dear family, this letter is a plea for your compassion, understanding, and patience. We have all just come through an episode of my mental illness. I have experienced it personally, and you have tried to deal with its effects while continuing to take care of our family as a whole. It has not been easy, but I have done the best I know how, and so have you. For this, I thank you. As a result of this episode, I am now exhausted. Maybe I look all right to you, but inside I am wounded. Even the least stress, the least effort of overwhelming me. I need to just sit and pull myself together. I need to sleep a lot and not do much at all. This may go on for quite some time. It may be hard for you to see me this way. You may feel it is your duty to help me snap out of it. You may be wondering if I'm using this as an excuse to be lazy. Please be gentle with me. Let me heal. If you want to do something for me, there are 3 things I would appreciate. 1, learn about my mental illness. This is an illness of my brain and body, just like any other disease. It also affects my ability to think, feel, and behave. Those effects may have been difficult for you to deal with. I'm sorry if the effects of my illness have made your life difficult. Learning about the illness may help you put these difficulties into perspective. Help me find effective treatment. This takes patience and persistence. In my present state, I may not have the energy to follow through by myself. I may need you to advocate for me until we find people and medicines that really help. 3, the other thing you can do for me is to listen with an open heart and an open mind. Don't try to advise me. Just listen while I work this out for myself. Your trust and understanding during this time of rest and recuperation will help me feel confident enough to decide when I am able to step, perhaps gradually, back into life activities. Thank you for your support and compassion. It will make my path to recovery more smooth and sure. With thanks and hope. Now, this letter is from one of our family-to-family classes, and when you take our 8-week class, this is one of the exercises that you learn is empathy. This person is hurting.
Yes.
They do not know what's going on with them, and they can't explain it to you, okay? And by being upset with them doesn't get you anywhere. So in our classes, we learn I statements, not you did this and you did that. I feel that maybe today we can't discuss this. So when you feel better, let's sit down and see if there's a way we can do this. So with empathy, it as you said, you wouldn't treat somebody with cancer
Mary Ann,
unempathetic.
in the mic, in the mirror. They can't.
Oh, I'm sorry. You wouldn't treat anybody with cancer and empathetically. So this is a disease of the brain. And why don't we take care of our brain? It's the most important part of our whole life. If we didn't have a brain, we'd be a vegetable. Thank you.
So I need just stay there real quick. Stay there real quick, because part of what I'd like you to be able to do is tell us what NAMI, South Suburb, Chicago. What are your current needs? It's such a great organization that provides so much service for so many, that can provide so much for so many. What are your current needs, and how does someone get involved?
Okay, well, I found NAMI, over, my daughter's now 50. She was in her 30s when she was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and it saved our lives, okay? So with taking the family class, I emphasize in every class that I facilitate that families need to get involved. When you don't worry about that illness day after day and get involved and say, okay, there is hope out there, so how can I help bring that hope to other people? By getting involved, I have been an advocate for over 20 years and president for about 15. I feel that when I go out, I want people to know that it helped me, okay? And I think when your loved one sees that you get active, they may have that aha moment like my daughter did when she was in the hospital. She was very angry with me because I had to have her involuntarily committed. But she had an aha moment. There must be something really wrong with me for my mother to put me in the hospital. So she started taking the medication the next day. She's graduated from college with a degree in psych and art. She teaches mental health first aid in the community. So she's part of her illness, but she's learned everything she needs to know to keep herself in recovery. Doesn't mean that she doesn't have bad days, but families need to realize that when you get active and show them that you truly believe in what you're learning and try to discuss it with them, I think it works miracles. But I'm going to be very honest with you. People, especially when they've come later in life and it keeps going and going and there seems like there's never any ending to it, it's hard. But the other thing with NAMI South Suburbs, we're all volunteers, okay? I don't get paid for what I do, and I don't care, because I feel I'm out here educating people on what they need to do to help that person that lives with the illness. So all our board members are not paid, and so on our board right now, we need an accountant that can help us just take care of our donations that we get in our membership. It's not a real hard job, and you have to be part of the board. I would love to have more volunteers to come out with me and be at health fairs and give out that information. I'm only one person, but I don't mind doing it. But it would be nice to see other people being out there talking about mental health and how it's helped their family or how it's starting to help their family. We're having a few events that are coming up that it's Minds in Motion, where we're going to try to stop the stigma. Come out and join us and just see what we're all about. And it's a little fundraiser. And I could use a grant writer too.
All right, very good. Thank you, Mary. Thank you. All right. So I got one more question that I want to have on this side, and then we're going to move back on this side. But if you have not had the opportunity to write down your question, please take a moment to write down your question, pass them to the middle, we'll bring them up, and we'll get them answered. We're right on good schedule time, which is absolutely great. And then we'll kind of move back to this side, and then we'll kind of open it up. But I'd like to go to Trey, if you would. How do you diagnose someone that's suffering from mental illness?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And by the way, the name is Dr. Tyree, T-Y-R-E, and just in case you guys are looking for me out there in the world. All right, so for a clinician to diagnose, I want to sort of compare it to when you go to your medical doctor. Whenever you go to your medical doctor, the first thing they do is ask you what's wrong. So we do the same thing. We ask you what's wrong. If we can get some additional information, We ask, just standard questions. Have you been hospitalized? What was the reason? And we're information gatherers. So we're gathering this information from many different sources. Depending on what you say may be wrong with you, we have certain measures that we use. We got self-help, inventories and worksheets that we get you to fill out. We also use objective measures. So we utilize things to be able to back up and support our ideas that we have, for what might be going on. Once we gather that information, we were trained to sort of identify certain things. So we have this manual that's called the DSM-5TR, that stands for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the 5th edition, of course. And what we do, we look at whether or not it's across multiple settings. We got a criteria we follow. So in other words, if what you think is wrong with you is only happening at home, but then you go to church and everything is fine, you can go to the gym, everything is fine, then we back away from your theory that you have a serious mental illness in that case. But if we find out that whatever is going on with you is across multiple settings, so you have the same issue at work, you have the same issue that's preventing you from going out with your friends, you have the same issue when you come to church, you may not even come to church, so now you're starting to be bothered by it. So when we find out what you're bothered by, we look at the criteria. And what I mean by criteria, we look at, okay, well, if this person is not getting out of bed, they got low energy, so we're trying to match up the criteria. And with that, it's a complexity in that, because some of these disorders can mimic other disorders. So that's when our expertise come in, and I always tell people, because we see that all the time. People come in and say, Doc, I have this. I say, no, you don't. So we have to differentiate, what that person is experiencing, and then look at it from a clinical perspective, see how it's permeating throughout that person's life, and then thus the diagnosis is born. And I tell people that you're not the diagnosis, you're a person just afflicted with something. And because of it, then we go to the literature and we find out what, a person in this particular situation, this works out. We, check the literature. Hey, this works when we do that. We combine it with some medication, so we do all of these things to be able to not only diagnose, but also to treat. And I want to, and every time I give a presentation, I always have to distinguish between, what the public think are practitioners versus what the state of Illinois think are practitioners. So you want to make sure if you're getting any type of mental health services that you get it from someone trained to be able to license, treat, diagnose mental disorders. And we as clinical psychologists, that will just tell the public that we've gone through this rigorous training. We got this state license. We get all the, continuing education to make sure we're sharp and on top of our game. If a person is not licensed, ask that person if they're being supervised by a licensed person. And we understand that psychologists are not the only people who can help, but if you don't want to spin your wheels and just keep, going from place to place, just like your car, you just don't want to go to the back of the alley and have somebody work on it. You would rather go and say, hey, Mercedes made this car, so let me see what Mercedes say about this. So we're just at you guys. Oh, we had a clap for Mercedes, okay? Absolutely. So we just want to have, an opportunity. And again, we're few in numbers. One of the reasons why I wanted to be a psychologist was, because I didn't see people. Matter of fact, I was in the social services probably about 20 years before I decided to go to school, and I'd never seen in my social service, history, a clinical psychologist. So when I went to school, I looked to see what was the percentage of African Americans who are psychologists, and we have roughly maybe about 400,000 in the United States, and we only have 2% that are African American like us, and we have less than 1% like me. So we just want you guys to know we're small in numbers, but we're out here. And if you have any questions about, whether or not you're experiencing any type of mental disorder, just make sure you go to the professional, okay?
Very good. Thank you. All right, Pastor Singleton, you deal with a lot of issues daily. It's almost comparable to our men and women that are in the first responders. the things that you hear, see, do, and what have you. And this goes to the issue of mental wellness. How do you take care of you and your mental state in terms of mental wellness, and what can be done?
Well, one answer is I'm incredibly self-aware. It is amazing to me how you can live in you and not know you. It amazes me. I am just incredibly self-aware. And then, as I've stated before, my wife and I have been married 50 years, so that's like,
Woohoo!
so that's like
That's a
having,
hand clap. That's a hand clap.
the Holy Spirit, my conscience, and conscience number 2. And before I directly answer that question, please let me, I wrote this down because it's going to be part of probably what we'll deal with. As I said, this is inspiration, then information. Because once, and it may be one of the questions you have, Keith, I'm not sure, but so if you got it, fine, I'll back off. But one of the huge things that happens in my office is that many of the people here at the church, many times they're the leaders in their family. And when they see how to handle something, they catch it from the rest of the family. Ostracized, you're not gonna put my mom in the hospital, ain't nothing wrong with daddy, you know. I think that also really needs to be stated, because that especially if we're dealing with end of life care, which I think is gonna be a part of what I'm working on for our next series, is dealing with, because I've seen families just split down the middle on that over and end up ostracized. Families that were close end up not talking together for years over that kind of thing. But back to me personally, and this I hope will help all of you. I am now 73 years old. And the last few years have been incredibly difficult for me. Not health-wise, I'm in great health. My members know, and I proved it one Sunday last year, I can literally run over this entire church up and down the 200 and some steps in and out there. I can do it in less than 15 minutes, right now. I just need gym shoes. Because I work out, I stay in shape, and I have here I have to deal with the people here. Yes. That's my job. But see, what I make sure of, and this will be helpful for some of y'all that don't know this, I make sure my house is peaceful. See, when I get home, me and Sister Singleton get along. I'm serious. I mean, even when we argue or whatever, we figure out how to address issues, how to move on. Because I think if you can get to your house and have peace, you can just about deal with anything outside that house. If you can get some peace there. And so the last few years, as I stated, have been very, very stressful. I got to make this very short in the interest of time because I am now starting to move toward retirement. I'm not ready to retire today or anything, but I'm moving toward it. And I think and the Lord has been revealing things to me. See, we often talk about success, and you get psychology, y'all know all this stuff, but maybe I'm putting a twist to it. We tend to define success whether you have a large family, you maybe got some money in the bank. Can I challenge that thinking?
Yes.
I think that you ultimately have to define success in each stage of your life. There is no one stage in your life you get to, and then that just represents success. And the reason is because everything is constantly changing. I got up this morning, honestly, and I said to myself, this church started in 1996. And then I'm a CPA, so you know I do math well, and I was trying to mess the math up. I kept going, this can't be 28 years. How is it? This don't make no sense, but it's a reality. So at first, I fought my reality like many of you do. You know, this is why you got guys 85 years old, got ponytails, earrings, Women still wearing real tight stuff, Since I dumped on the brothers, I gotta say something about the women. We don't embrace sometimes the new seasons in our life. And I had Keith read a book that he loved. What's the name of that book again?
A Resilient Life.
It's called A Resilient Life, and what's the author's name? My mind is somewhere else.
I forgot.
Okay, but it's called A Resilient Life. But here's the key, and this is a book about 400 pages. He went through it like that, and I have too. But one of the key points in A Resilient Life is this. Every 10 years of your life, you're faced with a different set of questions than before. Every 10 years, think about it, from childhood, as you get old, I just want to get out of my mama house. Well, then the next 10 years, you got a wife, you got kids, I just wish these kids would grow up. I mean, on and on, you get different questions. So each season of your life, success is defined differently.
Yes.
So I'm in a season of my life now where here's where the Lord had to help me. To learn how to relax. I broke down in tears about 3 weeks ago. Because one of the things about me transitioning is the thought that this thing started with 12 people. We now close to we have 4,000 members. And I'm like, I've been working like a Hebrew slave. No days off until recently. Just working. Now we got full staff, a couple of dollars in the bank, and I'm angry with God. So now I got to retire, huh? I'm just being real. This is going to help you. This is going to help you. I'm literally... You don't have a relationship with God if you can't from time to time be angry with God.
That's right. That's exactly right.
You get angry with your husband, you get angry with your wife. There are times me and God, we got to go on, we arguing. Now I got to leave all this, I've done all the work. Then God let me know I did all the work. I just let you do it. But here's the point. 3 weeks ago, and I broke down in tears. I get, like some of you, it's called the U version of the Bible. It gives you a Bible verse every day. So I do my own devotional. I just don't do sermons. I got to have God for myself. It popped up, Keith, and here's what it said. I think it's Hebrews 4:10, and then I'm done. It said, God is not unrighteous to forget your labor of love that you have shown toward him and toward his people. And that just broke me down, because that started shifting me, saying, you know what? I've got to embrace this new season in my life, take some of this stress off of me, enjoy going on vacation, stop meeting with all these crazy people I'm sorry, not supposed to. Man, I was doing so good, too.
Come on back, Pastor. Come on back.
I'm sorry. These people that have mental health challenges. And just realize I'm 73 and I can't do what I could do at 43. So that's how I've dealt with it. I just have kept growing and embracing each new season of my life. My wife, this is the best time in our marriage. 50 years. It's the best time, enjoying our kids, our grandkids. Now you start looking back at what God has blessed you to achieve and who's blessed because you've been here. That's how I've approached being healthy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That book, the book is a life changer. It's called Living a Resilient Life. I don't know the author. I can't remember it, but it is well worth the read. I've read it 3 times since he gave it to me, just because I want to incorporate some of those perspectives into my day-to-day. Yep. So I want to now move to Judge and then the Troy. In the area of mental health proceedings, I know we've talked a lot about a lot of different types of things, but there's probably something that I missed or we missed dealing with mental health proceedings. If you could take a few minutes before we move into Q&A and kind of expound on what you think that some other areas we need to know about, or maybe something that we've missed that you'd like to talk about.
Now, say, it's cruel and unusual punishment. Forced me to go after Pastor Singleton. You should have finished here.
Well, I wasn't going to do that.
You should have finished here. But I'm not sure if there's anything that we didn't touch in regards to mental health proceedings before court. If there is, you can approach me afterwards. I can give you the number over to the courthouse and give you mine. I am happy to help. It is something that is personal for me because my oldest has autism. I will say, I think Marianne asked in regards to how has being involved with your loved one who has mental health, there is a benefit for that person, but also overall. I tell my son all the time, thousands of people have benefited because of you. And the reason why is because I have 100 to 200 people in front of me a day. And while my kids may not think I'm the most patient judge, I am considered by my colleagues to be. But I can give you 2 examples within the past 2 months. I had a young man come before me, and anytime he comes into the courthouse, he's been involved with the system since he was 13. He has a team of deputies that all come in, they rush in, they're with him. Whatever courtroom he touches has 5, 6 deputies, all males at the very least. And he came into my courtroom on the issue, has now been with me for about probably a year or two. And after I finally got involved and found out what was going on with the case and met with the attorneys, and he had a situation where he came into the courthouse, came into my courtroom, there's about 6, 7 deputies with him, and they want to take him into custody. They want me to take him in. And they said, well, he gave us problems downstairs, and he's not doing this, and he didn't check in. And this is somebody who I've seen him at his best, seen him at his worst, so I know he's a good kid. He's approximately 18, 19 years old. So what I did, because this is something I live with. I have an older son who was 13. I've seen the episodes, I've seen it. So I ordered every deputy out of the courtroom, except for one. I called him up here. I didn't even let the attorney stand right in front of me. I called him up here and looked at him and just said, because I could see it and I knew. I said, did you take your medication? He goes, no, Judge, no, it was hurting my stomach. I said, you see everything that's going on, all the deputies, that you're freaking them out, you're scaring them. I said, here's what I want you to do. I said, go home. I'm ordering all of them to stand down. You go home, I want you to eat, take your medication, and then come back and see me. And then let's go through this again. He did that. He came back over for my afternoon court call. He thanked me. He apologized to the officers. But that is an example in regards to, because I know, because I live with it, because I've gone through it, I'm able to recognize folks when they sit there and come in episodes. And I would give one final example, and then I'll sit down. That was, I had a young lady in front of me who, undiagnosed, never said a word, got arrested for a DUI, and came before me. When somebody gets arrested for a DUI, your license is automatically suspended. You're not entitled to a public defender or appointed attorney, and she represented herself on it. Well, she's going against trained, skilled attorneys. The hearing was lost. She lost the license. Then I appointed her a public defender for the case. We did a trial. They showed me the video. And I looked at this case for a young lady who had turned over into a cemetery off of the street, brought deep into it, freaked out the officer, scared him to death because he had never had anybody pull up deep into a cemetery. Lights pitch dark, and she didn't just pull into the cemetery. She pulled into it as she was on a regular traffic stop. And I recall him asking a question. He thought it was drugs, and he asked her, or he thought it was alcohol. I said, what have you been drinking? And she stepped out of the vehicle, and he freaked out because as soon as he pulled over, she steps out of the vehicle, walks to the back, and he says, whoa, what are you doing? She said, well, you pulled me over. What's the problem? He says, what have you been drinking? She says, alcohol. Oh, God, no, not me. He says, then he went to, after arresting her for alcohol, then he turned around, she blew a .00, arrested her for drugs. And he says, I'm a trained drug officer, and I have trained drug recognition officer, I'm an expert in the field. This is before me. Well, I'm sitting there looking at somebody where I'm looking at this young lady. I saw her represent herself. I knew that there was something there that was undiagnosed. Her attorneys, and I called them up and told them, go ask her what is her diagnosis. Called both the state and the defense up at the same time. There's something there, tell me what it is. She was undiagnosed, had nothing there. But I could tell by her reaction when she got pulled over, I could tell by her reaction when we sat there over in court, and by the fact in simple plain language of evidence where she's arrested for alcohol. Now you're sitting there telling me you're a drug recognition expert, and she's now arrested for drugs, and it has to be drugs. So this is somebody where I not only found her guilty, but I ordered the state to recall her case back up for her license, and gave her back a license right away, because this is somebody who got pulled over for a situation where it was strictly an officer not being able to realize that she had a mental health issue, had nothing to do with alcohol, had nothing to do with drugs, but she was acting differently than everyone else, and he didn't understand that. But because I have a child with autism, because I deal with mental health, because I see this on a daily basis, that's one situation where, as I look back to my son and say, God works in mysterious ways. Well, because of you, thousands of people have benefited. These 100, 200 people to come in.
Yeah.
God bless.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you so much for the work that you do. Okay, Troy, because law enforcement is such a key component in this space, and as we're trying to change the narrative. We're trying to put a system that is more user-friendly for families that are suffering from mental health and wellness, and those that are actually suffering. I know we covered a lot, but I want to make sure that that maybe we go back over, tell us a little bit more about 988, and anything that you thought that we might have missed, maybe fill in. Because 988 is, a lot of people don't know what 988 is. And so I'd like, if you would, to speak about a little bit more about 988. We did have a question about what is CIT. You can, if you go back over that, and then whatever else what we might have missed.
Sure, absolutely. So just to answer the first question, CIT stands for Crisis Intervention Team, and that is a group of stakeholders from within the community who work together as a team to address the issues of mental health and people going into crisis. So for example, it originated in 1988, Memphis, Tennessee. There was an incident in which there was a young black male. He was, I believe, 17 or 18 years of age. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. He was having a crisis. He was in an argument with his mother. When police arrived on scene, he was armed with a knife. Suffice it to say that within a minute or two of officers arriving on scene, he made a motion that the officers felt threatened, and unfortunately, that young man was shot and died. Right. As a result of that, the community got together. This is back in 1988. Said, we need to do better. And so they got together, mental health advocacy, mental health service providers, and they got together law enforcement, and they said, how can we do better? And the whole idea is, what can we do as a community, gathering all these stakeholders together to help prevent people from going into crisis, get them the help that they need, to have trained responders so that when police do have to respond to a scene, that they respond better, that they recognize somebody may have a mental health crisis. And then after that, we can connect them. So it truly is what you guys are doing here today and in the past year in Madison, and that is to get your faith-based leaders, to get your government organizations, to get your schools, your law enforcement, everybody on the same page working together, because for so long we have operated in silos. And so often we're saying, it's not my fault, it's their fault. And everybody's pointing fingers. And unfortunately, in the meantime, the people that we are here to help are falling through the cracks.
So Troy, I want to, you're going to answer the question again. So for those of you who have a resource card in your bag, and then, resource card. We have a resource card that's been provided to you, and these are providers in your area that have, as part of their operations, crisis intervention teams. Why is that important? Because if I call 988, they're going to connect me to Kirby, or they're going to connect me possibly to Oak Street. Oak Street's going to assess it, and then they're going to send out possibly a crisis intervention team to your home. That's a de-escalation, trained professionals coming to your home as opposed to a law enforcement officer that's not sure what to do at that point. But I want to make sure that you're clear. You have, as part of your packets, this resource card that is regionally focused for those providers in your area that if you need help, it's here. It's here. Okay, Troy.
So, on to the question with 988.
Yes.
I already said that it has now replaced the former National Suicide Prevention Line. It is now the National Suicide Prevention and Crisis Lifeline. Any mental health or emotional issue that you may be going through, call 24/7, and you will be connected to trained call takers who will help walk you through the crisis, help you to stabilize. But here's the best part. They will provide resources in the community, and you don't even have to be the person in crisis. So you may be a family member that says, I don't know what resources are available. Call 988. They'll be able to help you. Now, I can tell you that the statistics that 988 is reporting is that with a phone call alone, nothing else, 80% of the calls do not result in a law enforcement response. But it gets better, because 988 is more than just a phone number. It is a program. And part of that program is to have what's called crisis response teams. Here in Illinois, they're called 590 teams because it has to do with the statute. A 590 team is a person with lived experience and a qualified mental health professional. And they work in conjunction with 988. So if you call 988 and they are not able to successfully resolve the crisis over the phone, they send out a 590 team to wherever you are, free of charge. No law enforcement response. The statistic for communities that have 988 with the 590 plan in play, 98% of the calls do not involve a law enforcement response. 98%. Now, if those 590 teams show up and they determine that a transport involuntarily is required based on the circumstances, then they will call law enforcement. And that's when you try to get the crisis intervention team trained officers, the CIT officers. The nice part is I heard you mention Kirby. Kirby is one of those who are authorized. They're receiving 590 funds. And there was another table out. Did you guys stop by NIAP? I always forget. It's the National Youth Advocate Program. They are also a 590 program. They have their own number if you don't want to call 988. That number is 8338-CRISIS. And I have a list, but it's basically all of the south suburbs. So you guys can call them directly, or you can call 988. So you have numbers to call before you call 911. However, if you feel that somebody is a threat, if it is violent, if there is criminal activity, please, you can call 911. Don't feel that you can't, but as we said previously, just let them know it is for a mental health crisis.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to let, but before we move on to the next question, I'd like to recognize someone who just came in the room, been a very big advocate for mental health and wellness since we began this. Mayor Reinbold, would you stand up, please, just to say hello? Mayor of Richland Park, thank you very much. Thank you for being here. All right.
Just a quick, a couple of quick comments. Some of you all have asked about the index cards. Please look in your bag. You should have an index card there. And then we have a couple of volunteers on each side that will take your questions, and we'll try to get in as many questions as possible. We have at least about 20 minutes or so more for questions. The other thing is that in your bag also, you should have a survey. If you can complete the survey, that would be tremendously helpful for us. Thank you. I think Keith wanted me to give him a break for a second, so I'll just try to read a couple of the questions real quick. So one question we have here is that, how do you work or handle a coworker that is bipolar? He's up and down in total denial. I spoke with my manager. It's exhausting.
Okay, I'll take that one. All right, well, first of all, just because the person thinks that the coworker is bipolar doesn't mean the person is bipolar. Indeed, that person who said that may be bipolar. but I think that it just suggests that, workplace conflict does occur. So if there's any, workplace conflict, it doesn't mean that everybody within that conflict has a mental disorder. That just means people have to speak up. Go to HR, and follow the channels to be able to, eradicate some things. And I'm saying it like that because, so easily we throw out these mental health terms and think, that everything must, be mental health related. That seems like that can just be a workplace conflict.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. The next question is, how do you find a counselor that fits you?
Okay. All right. I wish I had the succinct answer to this, because the reality is it's hard, and sometimes it takes a lot of sessions with a lot of people to determine what is the best fit for you. I'll give you some questions, though, that you can ask your potential provider that might be helpful. Number one, the question is actually to assess for yourself. What are you needing out of therapy? Are you needing to vent? Are you needing to process something? Are you needing tools or active approaches to help you learn something? Or anything else? Two, you can ask your potential provider how they practice or how they work to see if it aligns with something that you need. So for instance, If I go to therapy, I just need a space to process. I don't need any tools, and so I would ask the provider, how do you adjust your style to allow for some processing? Another question to ask is, how active is the provider in session with you? Do they challenge you? Might they assign you something to reflect or to think about? I've had a lot of clients come to me because they wanted a therapist who wasn't just there to listen, they actually wanted some feedback. So start with kind of asking yourself what would be helpful for you in therapy, and feel free to ask a potential provider if they're able to meet those needs. Psychology Today is a great website to find providers. Therapy for Black Girls is another great website to find providers, and I think they have a therapy for Black men too. And then check with your insurance to see if your insurance network has providers who are in network.
Thank you. Okay, our next question here is, I'm reading directly from the card, I'm not interpreting anything here. Why all officers are not trained for mental health? Why don't the officers address mental health using a stun gun instead of deadly force, a real gun? Because I'll stop at that. So I think the person was basically asking is that, why aren't all officers trained on mental health issues, number one? And then why can't they use stun guns opposed to guns when they're in a mental health crisis situation with someone?
Sure. So to address the first half of the question, why are all officers not crisis intervention team trained or CIT trained? And this to many people would be like, well, it's common sense. Everybody should have this training. CIT at its very core, as I said, it is a collaborative program. And what we want is we want officers who are experts, as much as you can be, or I shouldn't say experts, specialists in crisis intervention. So what the state has done, what CIT International advocates for, what the Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board advocates for, is that you have all officers base level mental health trained. So for example, I teach an 8-hour state certified course for all the officers in the state of Illinois so that they get that base level training. They learn how to communicate, they learn how to recognize signs and symptoms, what the law says, etc. But they want CIT training reserved for specialists, and here's the reason why. We want people, number one, who want to be a CIT officer. Telling somebody that you will do this does not make them an effective CIT officer, right? Can you not see that going very badly? Yes. Number two, officers who are still young and don't have a couple years, now it's just changed to 1 year because we have such a shortage. It used to be 2 years on the job because we like to say, for the first 2 years, you're still trying to figure out how to be a law enforcement officer, right? Before you take this on. Additionally, having some of that prior experience to relate to as you go through that training will help you to take more from it. And then lastly, it's this. A CIT officer needs to receive constant annual training. The way when I talk to chiefs and I talk to administrations is I say, if you had an officer and you wanted him and you trained him in firearms and you sent him to the best firearms training in the country, and he could run and he could shoot in the size of a quarter at a full pace sprint, would you never send him to training again? And they were like, well, no, that's ridiculous. He has to keep that skill up, right? It's the same with mental health training. We want officers who are specialized in this. And the mere fact is, especially with staffing shortages, we cannot afford to send every single officer at an agency every single year to mental health training. So I want officers, enough that we have enough on scene, or enough working, that there's always somebody to respond. The last part of that is this. The more you do something, the better you get at it. And if I have all my officers as the specialists, they're only doing it once in a while. But an officer who keeps getting called and does it time and time again gets much better at identifying what he or she is dealing with, much better at communicating, establishing rapport, getting people to go voluntarily and engage in the treatment that's going to help them better and not go into crisis in the future. So that's why not all officers receive the 40-hour CIT training. However, every officer needs to have that base level training so that they can recognize this. The second half, I'm sorry, go ahead. The second half of the question, I believe, was why do they not use a taser instead of a firearm?
Yes, that was the second half.
Okay. This one is hard to answer without context. What I can tell you is that officers often are in rapidly evolving, highly charged, emotional situations and have to make split-second decisions, and it can be very difficult. I can't answer for why an individual officer and an individual incident chose whatever level of force he or she may have used at that time. That's very highly contextualized. I know that, again, I'm making a generalization, but for the most part, officers don't want to use their firearms. We don't go to work saying that we want to shoot somebody, and it weighs on us heavily. I know that there are exceptions to every rule. I know that every situation is different, and I know that every profession has individuals that may not fit that mold. But again, I think it's highly individual, and the best that we can do, and the best that I try to do here, is to bridge that gap, to get the community to work with the officers, to get the officers to work with the community so that we connect people to the treatment that they need and not go into crisis. And if they do, then we have trained officers that can respond and get them the help that they need.
Thank you, Troy. We
Okay,
appreciate
hello.
that.
Hello. I would like to just add something to that. As a psychologist, we have to realize that police officers are people too, with some of the same issues that we all have. And actually, part of my job a few years ago was to conduct police and fire pre-hire evaluation, because there are a number of things that people try to, screen out to make sure that those cops go in, appropriately and not, be overbearing or become part of that crisis, So you can't have two people in a crisis situation, and one of them happens to be armed. So, so I just wanted to point that out, that, we try to screen as much as possible and weed out people who shouldn't even be cops anyway.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Thank you. I'll read this information real quick. We have many questions that are here, but only a specific amount of time. There's a couple of things that was brought to our attention. One is that some of you have asked if you could talk with the panelists afterwards. The panelists have always been open to have conversations with you afterwards, so they will make themselves available, those that can stick around for the resource fair afterwards to continue. And then the other is business cards. They want to make sure that if you have business cards, if you can provide business cards in addition to that. The other thing is that we did make the comment that we have resource cards in your packet. Unfortunately, it appears that we ran out, but what we will do, we do have some of these cards that we will place in the hall of Village of Matheson, because they have an information desk there, and we will also have them available at the Senior Center and Park Forest, in addition to the administration building where Supervisor Calvin Jordan's office is. So we'll make sure that we get these available within the next week or so. We'll have more printed out. The last statement or questions that we'll be able to address at this point in time is, are there any resources available for medication when a prescribed drug is not covered by private insurance? My son has been prescribed a new medication, which is $1,900 out of pocket monthly. So there's more comments that this parent is reaching out for, but we want to say and make sure that you know the resources that are out there and available. I know for a fact that there are several of them out there that can help if you don't have private insurance or if you don't have insurance. I know, for example, Cook County is there, so if you live within Cook County, there are programs that you can actually apply for, because some of us have worked for Cook County before, so we can say that as a matter of fact. But there are services out there that can help you to finance or either to provide the medication that you may need once you've been seen by another provider. So make sure that whoever asks a question, I'm sure that there are others, to make sure that you visit some of the vendors that are there.
Tina, can I just add on that real quick?
Yes.
That's okay.
keep looking
Super
here.
quick. I'm happy. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I am happy to add more information, if whoever asked that question is still here, I have some ideas that might help as well.
Thank you, Alana. We appreciate that.
Yeah, we're ready to go.
Yeah, okay, ready to say thank you?
Yeah, let me just say this one thing.
Okay.
So how do you measure success in an event like this? I'm always about measuring, right? You got to figure out where people are at and how well you did or what have you. That's anything you do, you should be measuring what you do. So how we measure success with this is that if one person that was here today came here and they got some information that they didn't know about, that they needed because of their own personal issue that they're going through, either themselves or a loved one, then we were successful in what we did. We were successful in what we did. And the other is, if any of you walked out of here and you came in the door and you're walking out with more information, again, it's another measure of success for this event. We are trying to do what? Change the narrative. One last thing. Repeat after me. It's okay not to be okay. You are not alone. All right.
Well, I think that sums up my thank you to everyone. I just had a few words that I just wanted to say quickly. Is to say that it has been our honor and a pleasure to bring everyone together, and especially these communities here at Victory. Again, our heartfelt thank you to Pastor Singleton. So hopefully I don't get emotional about this because of what he said to me a while ago. So getting off script for just a second, but what he said is that all of us that have, and starting with the support of Supervisor Jordan and also Mayor Sheila Chalmers Current, it said that with all the effort and work that we have put into this, after the first summit that we had in the fall, when we had the thoughts and ideas and we shared it with our planning committee, we had a small planning committee initially established through Rich Township that was supported by Supervisor Jordan. We talked about how important it is for mental health and wellness and a couple of other committees that we established, and he said, go for it. So we pulled together this committee, and we have worked hard over the past 2 years with so much support, so it's very much appreciated. But Pastor Singleton said after the first summit, he said that it's a shame all the work that you guys have put into this. I think we had maybe 125 participants at that time. He said, you put so much work into that. He said, we would like to have you to host this event at my church. And so we just kind of looked and was kind of, yes. So, and as Pastor Singleton said, we had almost 3 times the amount this time than we did the first time. So we had over 300 people here. So thank you very much, Pastor Singleton. Thank you very much, Supervisor Jordan, and thank you very much, Mayor Chalmers Current. We appreciate your support. And again, I did say thank you to all the volunteers and all of our committee members, but I do have one little thing that I want to say here as I continue to say thank you. Okay, as I continue to say thank you this evening. But this afternoon, but I wanted to say to help us to eliminate the stigmas and increase access to those that need the services. I think that not just those of you that are here today, our committee members, all of our wonderful volunteers, et cetera, we all have learned something. We all have been exposed to additional services in the South suburban area. We are, my husband and I, Keith and I, will continue to be advocates for the South suburban area, and we hope that you guys would join us in doing so. The last thing is to say that it was mentioned earlier, but my saying is that mental illness is medical illness. Let's change the narrative. Thank you all.
Before we go, because we got so much information, let's give this outstanding panel a round of applause. Thank you so much. They volunteered their time to come in and do this. We thank you so much for you being here and these panelists and the information you got. We really appreciate it, and thank you for coming.